Welcome to the workshop, Healing Through Relationships. This workshop was originally called Healing Your Relationships because I used to think there was such a thing as a diseased relationship, and all you had to do was heal the relationship. What I came to discover in the years of doing this work is that every relationship is a perfect creation. There are no diseased relationships. Every relationship will perfectly reflect to you exactly what you need to deal with in your life. And through your relationship interactions, you get to look at the parts of you that hold you out of life. And as you do that, and through those relationship interactions, you take responsibility and do your work, then through those relationships, you get to heal. Now, in one of our earlier workshops, we asked a question. And the question we asked was, how many have ever held a newborn? And we asked people to go back and imagine holding that newborn again and tap into the energy of the newborn. And we created a list out of people's responses to that question. And the list that we came up with was love, awesome, purity, peace, sweetness, inner sense, joy, wonder, and angelic. These are the words that people describe the newborn as. And of course, if you think about, if you're watching this tape right now or you're new to this workshop tonight, if you think about your experience of handling a newborn, you might have some different words to add to that. And I've asked this question about the newborn of tens of thousands of people, and 100% of the time people's answer is always some variation on the theme of love. And my offering is that reason for that is because we each know exactly what it is that we're made of. We're made of this stuff called love. In fact, it is our very being. And when we give up the active presence of love in our lives, we are actually giving up life itself. Those words on the left-hand side of the board describe your true nature. They describe my true nature. They describe the true nature of every human being in existence. Although perhaps we found at times we or others don't exactly live up to that. In fact, the world teaches us to identify with something else. And so, in an earlier workshop, I asked another question, and that was, how many have ever done something that they regret having done? And I asked people to go back and identify what they were feeling when they did what they regretted. And the list ended up being this list: guilt, shame, anger, fear, irritation, stupidity, pride, and worn out. And I point out that all of these words are words about non-being. When we go into the advanced course on relationship called Codependence to Interdependence, we'll see exactly how this non-being is formed and exactly what to do to undo it. The average person, in terms of their being in our culture, is dead, I would offer, by the age of 4. It takes another 70 or 80 years for their bodies to fall over, because they've bought into an identity that is unlike what they really are. And when we buy into an identity that is unlike what we are, we're buying into death. We're giving up the very life force that keeps us vital. And that is why people think in terms of aging and death as a natural process. About 30 years ago, I was probably 9 or 10 years into this work when I heard a quote that came from a medical research group in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was a group called the DeCourcy Clinic. And I only heard this quote once, and it was so burned into my mind, I have never forgotten it. And here's what they said, medical researchers, mind you. And what they said was, time is not toxic. Time has no effect on human tissue under any conditions. It is the belief in the effect of time by those who subscribe to such a belief that acts as a poison. Aging is not natural, but if you put hostility or fear into your cellular structure, you will begin its deterioration. I was in New York doing a television interview a couple of years ago, several years ago now. And after I completed the interview, the fellow who was doing the interviewing said, you know, you're doing the same work as this cell biologist, Bruce Lipton. And I said, I'm doing the same work as a cell biologist. How do you figure that one? He said, well, watch his video. He gave me a copy of it. I watched it, and I was just amazed as I watched what this cell biologist is doing. Now, I've been teaching this work for going on to close to 40 years now. And here's what the latest in medical research is showing. When you think a thought, that thought turns into a molecule in your body. That molecule, which is called a neuropeptide, circulates around in your structure until it finds a cell with a receptor site that matches. And then the cell that it lands on replicates the neuropeptide chemically, and you get to live with the chemistry of your thoughts. Now, if you've ever found yourself in any of these states of non-being, guilt, shame, anger, fear, irritation, stupidity, pride, worn out, your mind says, well, I only feel those things because other people do things. They make me angry. They frighten me. They just wear me down. And I would offer that whatever excuse your mind uses to justify that somebody else is responsible for your hostility and fear, there has only ever been, there will only ever be one reason that you will ever in your life experience hostility and fear. And the reason will be because it is in your physiology. If it is not in your physiology, then you can't experience it. And when someone comes along and triggers it in you, an interesting thing happens in this human mind. We take what it is that we don't want to be responsible for. We've been through it 1,000 times, but we've always got somebody else to blame for it when it comes up in us. You made me angry. You made me afraid. You made me sad. You made me this. You made me that. And there is no you made me that is true. You only ever experience those energies because they are in your own physiology. Now, it's amazing how many people go into relationships carrying a ton of internal grief and trauma, and they go into the relationship expecting to find wonderment and peace. They find a shine in that relationship, and they think that shine will get rid of all their drama and trauma. And they're incorrect. Your relationships will never get rid of your drama and trauma. Only you can do that. In fact, as your relationships become more and more connected, if you're developing true relationships, they will show you more and more of the trauma that you hold in you. Because I would offer that before we as human beings put energies in that didn't belong in this body, you know, in the ancient teachings, the body was called a temple. And they talked about defiling the temple. Before you defiled your temple, the purpose of life, I would offer, was aliveness, joy, and creativity. You just have to watch a newborn to know that. But the world slowly creeps in, puts its thumbprints on you, and convinces you that hostility and fear is the way to go. And if you want to have true, real relationships, you can only have those when you open your heart. But if you've put trauma and drama, either genetically or from your own experiences, into your heart or your unconscious, then as you start to go into relationship and you open your heart, you'll find what's there. And you won't find what's there because of what your partner says or does, though they may be the one that triggers it in you at any given moment. You will only experience these energies because they're carried in your physiology, though your mind can make up 1,000 stories about how it's everybody else's fault. And so what we want to do with these tools is to recognize that true relationship happens when we can open our hearts, when we can be responsible for what we find there. And we turn to our relationships for the sacred support of assisting us in moving through the things that never belonged to us in the first place. Or we'll enter into relationship and we'll pretend that everything that we're feeling is caused by them. I would offer that the only things you can feel are the result of the energies and the information that you carry in you from your own life experience and from the experience of the generations. But the mind is tricky. The mind takes the content you don't want to own, and it builds pictures. And we think the pictures it builds are about what's out there. But the pictures it builds are not about what's out there. The pictures it builds always tell us about what's in here. And through our relationships, as we come to a level of connectedness and trust and open the next part of our heart and find what's there, instead of blaming everybody else for what's there in our relationships, when we take responsibility, we see in that situation the opportunity to heal. And so I'm going to do a piece of my art on the board, and if you've seen me do this before for the purpose of our camera and such, I'm going to ask you to just play along with us as we figure out what this piece of art is. And it's a fairly simple one. Could anybody tell me what it is that you see there on our board? Kilroy. Kilroy. No, it's not Kilroy.
A frog.
A frog. No, it's not a frog. What do you see?
Igloo.
A two-door igloo. No, not a two-door igloo. Come on, what is it? A tunnel. A car. A Volkswagen. Well, actually, it's a scrubwoman from the back. Well, truly, it's just lines on a board. When you look at those lines on the board through your mind, you're looking at a framework. That framework causes content in your mind to fire. Now, the only way that content can fire is if it's in your mind, obviously. Let's imagine that we took a man from the jungles of South America. This fellow has never seen anything more complex than a dugout canoe. And we show him this diagram on the board. How long do you think it would take, and how much experience and how much explanation would you have to come up with to really truly get him to understand what you mean when you say this is a two-door igloo? What kind of content is going to have to be placed in his mind? I mean, to this fellow who's come from the Guatemalan jungles, it's subtropical. He's never been in a temperature where it's below 70 degrees. How much explaining are you going to have to do to him? What kind of content are you going to have to get into his mind for him to understand freezing cold? So cold that water that comes from the sky turns into white fluffy stuff. So cold that waves coming out of a body of water actually freeze in midair. What are you going to have to do to explain to him that you have a device with which you cut blocks of this hard water and you stack them and you form a home made out of frozen water. And you crawl inside of one of these two doors in order to stay warm. What are you going to have to give him in the way of content for him to have a clue what you're talking about? Do you get some sense of just something as simple as a two-door igloo, the complexity of content, the number of different files in the mind that have to fire to produce that reality of a two-door igloo? How long do you suppose it's going to take to get him to understand fully what you mean when you say a two-door igloo? Do you think you could explain it to him in 10 minutes? Do you think you're going to have to take him out on an icy cold day and show him what frozen water means? Because they don't know about refrigerators. He's never seen this frozen water. He's never seen this white stuff come from the sky. He has no brain cells. He has no content for what you're talking about. Though you and I think in offhanded terms of two-door igloo. How are we able to do that? We are only able to do that because we have this complexity of content in our brain cell structure. And so when we look at that two-door igloo, we take the content of our minds and we project that content into our brain's image of the igloo. But is the igloo out there? That's just lines on a board. Where is the igloo in this experience? It's strictly in the brain cells of the person who's looking at the framework. Now, once you recognize that, you have a deep insight into relationships. Because, you know, when you look at somebody and you have a classification for them that holds a lot of complexity about their, you know, what kind of things might be issues in relationships. They're cold, they're hard-hearted, they're angry, they're manipulative, they pick on me, and on and on and on and on and on. In order to have that kind of complex reality show up in your mind about another person, do you suppose that perhaps that other person is just a framework that resonates content in you that you then put into your brain's image of them? And you might remember in Romans 2, and if you go back into the ancient Aramaic teachings, those teachings were simply about how life works, how our human organism works, how our minds work, how the health process of this human physiological system works, and how the world works. You might remember in Romans 2 they said, "Beware you who judge another, for that in which you judge another, you have been guilty of practicing." You know, I only need to listen to your conversation for 2 minutes about somebody that you're upset with, and I know a lot about the content of your mind. And you may not know that you're telling your life story as you spill about somebody else, or what you think is somebody else. And when you go into interaction with someone, what happens is that your content, where you are able to open and allow yourself to look at it, comes forward, but the mind does an interesting trick. It takes your content and it makes it look like it's about somebody else. So when we have a conflicting situation in a relationship, here's what we have. We have person one with problem one. Problem one comes from the mind of person one and is the content of person one. but it is projected into the brain's image of person 2. So person 1 is sure that person 2 is responsible for their content. And they lie to themselves because they have no clue that what they're feeling is what's happening inside of them. Now that makes for complexity in relationship, because here's what happens. Person 2, we're going to move them over here a little bit. Person 2 also has content. And when person 1 starts to resonate the painful content of person 2 out of the content in their minds, they will create an image of person 2. And they'll be sure the person 2 who has problem 2 will be sure that it's caused by person 1. And they will assign the task of making sure that person 1 cleans up the content of their minds, while person 1 assigns the task of cleaning up the content of their mind to person 2. Have you ever wondered why relationships can get so crazy? Because you're always looking at and feeling the content of your own mind. Everything that shows up as an image in your mind comes from what you hold in your mind. But if you pretend that it's not yours, then you will create a condition called unconscious, or what in the ancient scriptures was called the heart. And you might remember that this man named Yeshua 2,000 years ago said, you must forgive from your heart the wrongs of your brother. Now, through the Greek translations of those teachings, at least as it was always presented to me, I was supposed to let this terrible person who was the cause of all my pain off the hook for the fact that in this relationship I had pain. So this bleeding heart, I would forgive from my heart these terrible things that my brother did to cause all of my pain. And then everything would get better. If I do that form of so-called forgiveness, which incidentally is not forgiveness at all, what have I done? Have I done anything to address and heal the content of my own mind? I have done nothing to do that. In fact, by forgiving them, I have intensified the energy of my own painful content. Now, there is a benefit to pardoning, and what we've been taught in this culture is a tool of pardoning in place of forgiveness. We've been taught, you're responsible for my content, but I'll let you off the hook. Now, that usually comes from a place of some connectedness with love. And what we know is that when there is connectedness with love, whatever we can get to come out of the heart or the unconscious will begin to heal. So when we can lovingly let somebody else off the hook, whatever it is that will surface in our minds that is painful content will start to dissolve. Not because we've let them off the hook, but because there is the active presence of love when our painful content comes forward. But at the same time as I do that, by assessing or judging that my brother did this terrible thing, I just reinforce the energy dynamics of my own painful content, which means I'm going to get to do more and more and more of it. Now, what Yeshua would say in Aramaic would not be, you must forgive, let your brother off the hook for your painful content. What Yeshua would say to you is, you've got to stop your denial. You've got to stop pretending that your content is about anybody but you. And you must go into, and that word heart, we could not translate the word heart from the Aramaic in the Western world until just a few decades ago. For almost 2,000 years, we have been ignorant of the meaning of that word. The Aramaic language is a language that is rife with idioms, and the whole thought structure and understanding of the teachings out of that Aramaic language can only be understood in getting the original context and meaning of that language. My assessment in 25 years, I'm the director of a foundation that's translating the oldest known copy of the New Testament in Aramaic into English, and my assessment of that process in that coming from the Greek language is that you cannot speak the actual teachings of Yeshua in the Greek context. Expecting the Greek level of understanding and language, because language reflects the experience of a culture, expecting that language to carry the meanings that Yeshua had for his words is like expecting a kindergarten class to be able to give you a dissertation in nuclear physics. They're not going to be able to do it. It's just not possible. And so when you go back to the Aramaic, what you hear Yeshua saying in his original context, well, let me give you an example. Let's imagine that one of you here is an expert at speaking Russian. I don't speak any Russian, but we have someone who's going to fly over for our workshop series from Russia. And you volunteer to pick him up at the airport. You're going to put him up for the week, and you're going to house him and shuffle him around, and you're going to act as his translator. Now, let's imagine that through the period of the week, we get together and we have a couple of lunches. We maybe go catch a movie. We have dinner together a couple of times. This guy comes to all the workshops. We really have a great time. We're rollicking time with this fellow. And at the end of the week, as you're getting ready to take him back to the airport, I ask you if you would let our friend know that I think that he is really cool. And you turn to him in your best Russian and explain to him that I think he's got a low body temperature. Now, you translated my words perfectly, right? But did you convey anything of what I meant to him? Nothing whatsoever. The Greek language is so inept at being able to carry the flower, the subtleties of that Aramaic teaching that it's lost. And what we know now is, since the unconscious has been rediscovered in the West, is that when they said you must forgive from your heart, what they were saying is you must remove from your unconscious, from the part of you that you've been hiding in your brain's image of everyone else, that which you've put into your brain's image of your brother. So, in essence, he was saying you get to heal through your relationships. You will get to interact with your brother. Your brother's going to do a behavior that's going to show you your content. If your content is about non-being and that content takes over your awareness, then it will rob you of life itself. But you will say, and my brother really made me angry, or my brother really made me sad, or my brother really made me afraid. And you know, when people do that, they go, why does my brother leave me? Why am I left alone in relationships? What's going on here? Well, one of the things that most people do when they're about this size is they watch the adults around them when those adults are in pain. Have you ever watched a 2- or 3-year-old see mom or dad in tears and go over and try to calm them and make them feel better and fix it for them? Anybody ever seen that happen? Now, what did the 2- or 3-year-old child discover when they tried to do that? They discovered that they couldn't fix it for mom or dad. And almost everyone has created content or files in their minds that say that I can't fix mom or dad, therefore it is my fault. In about 100% of the situations where I've worked with people from divorced homes, and I don't care if they're people who are 50 or 80 years of age or 10 years of age, they believe that their parents' divorce was their fault. Why? Because when they didn't know any better at 2 or 3, they tried to fix it and they couldn't do it. And then came to the conclusion that it was their fault. So they have a file in their mind, so to speak, on my fault. And then, having tried perhaps more than once to fix it for an ailing parent, they went, it's hopeless. And they formed a file on hopelessness. And they formed further a file on, I can't do anything here, I'm helpless. Now, people, generally speaking, aren't in touch enough with their unconscious dynamics to know that when they're blamed for what someone else is experiencing, that they are being blamed by their own minds. And that when this person they're in relationship says, you made me angry, what this person is in essence saying is, I, person 1, have problem 1 called anger, it's my content, and it's all your fault, and I expect you to fix it for me. What's the response of most people when somebody simply uses a phrase of, you made me angry, sad, afraid? What that resonates in this person is, uh-oh, it's my fault, it's hopeless, and I'm helpless, and they leave. Now, many people physically stay present in that relationship, but they disappear. They leave emotionally. I've seen people who've had relationships where they've been together, or so-called relationships where they've been together for decades, but there's been no relationship for decades because they emotionally left way back here. If you want to actually create relationships where people feel like staying long term, you can't use projection language. Projection language is, you made me sad, you made me afraid, you made me angry, you made me, you made me, you made me. Tomorrow night's workshop, we're going to do communication. The early workshop, communication, did you hear what I think I said? And we're going to distinguish between what we call projection language and responsibility language. And how to start to language in a way that rather than bringing up this hopeless, helpless, it's my fault, you can help people to clear those energies out of their field, out of their file structure, and through your interaction, especially where there's conflict, you create healing because you've got the tools with which to create healing. And the opportunity to heal generally comes embodied in the form of a conflict in relationship. Because we will draw people to us through an energetic principle called the law of resonance. And the law of resonance, simply stated, says that when two energy systems are in tune or in harmony with each other, there's an interaction between them. There's a transfer of energy. It's called resonance. And so what will tend to happen is, according to the content of person two's mind, they will set up a field. And this is a literal, measurable energy field. Person one, according to their content, will set up a field. If there is a resonance between them, these two will be attracted to each other. All too often, people's attraction is based upon their matching bags of garbage. How do you tell? And by the way, in the world, relationships based in matching bags of garbage are called love relationships, interestingly enough. How do you tell if you've got an actual love relationship or a relationship based in matching bags of garbage? It's very easy. Have you ever had a relationship where love has turned to hate? Anybody ever had one of those? Well, my offering to you is that is absolutely impossible. Love, being, can only ever be itself. That's all it can ever be. And any relationship or any part of relationship that's based in being will always remain exactly that. But relationships through resonance and matching bags of garbage can turn to hate in just one instant. How does that happen? It happens when a person takes their content and they utilize this other person to keep their content hidden from themselves, and they insist that this other person must follow a set of rules so they never have to look at their content. And the minute that this person stops behaving in a way that keeps this person from looking at their own content is when love turns to hate. And they'll take their whole bag of garbage and dump it on their partner. But they dump it on their partner because it is in their mind to dump it. Now, how do you tell whose mind this garbage belongs to? We have this really complex test that we've developed in this work. It takes some time to learn it, but it's very powerful once you take the time to learn this tool. And the way you tell if the trauma or pain is from your content or not is, are you feeling it? If you're feeling it because it is in your field. Just because you can successfully build your brain's image of someone else out of it does not mean it belongs to that someone else. But people who live in denial and hold generations of painful content don't believe that their content's got anything to do with them. They'll talk about love and light, but when the chips are down and the stress is up, they'll take their painful content and put it into their brain's image of someone else, and they'll insist that they must be irritated, angry, frustrated, sad, or afraid because of what their partner did. And guess what? You can only be irritated, angry, sad, or afraid because your mind holds energies of non-being. And the truth is that this person has come to relationship with you carrying the blessing of knowing how to resonate what it is that you need to heal. If you stop projecting and pretending that your content belongs to them and you start owning your content, then you can start through your relationships to heal. Now we have a worksheet that we're going to hand you now, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to think about your 3 earliest memories of conflict. So the first step we're going to ask you to do, and if you're watching this on the video and you don't have the worksheet, you can go to our website, which is www.whyagain.com, whyagain.com, and look under worksheets, and you'll find the worksheet for this workshop. And it's called the Healing Through Relationships worksheet. And so the first thing we're going to ask you to do is to look at the 3 numbers, number 1, number 2, and number 3. And we're going to ask you to write about your 3 earliest memories of conflict. Now, there's some other material in between, but let that other material go for now. Write the 3 early memories of conflict first. Now, what is a memory of conflict? That is something that you classify as conflict. You don't need my definition. It can be a conflict in which you were directly involved, or it can be a conflict in which you were just an observer. It doesn't matter. Whatever your mind defines as conflict, this is your worksheet. It's only for your use. And so start out, if you would, and the 3 early memories of conflict. And as you write those, are you breathing? Does anybody notice anything happening with your breath? What did you notice? You stopped. You're holding your breath. Now, when I don't want to own my content and I want to project it, in order to do that, I have to hold my breath. I have to shut down the flow of the breath so I can take this information that I'm hiding from myself and use it to build my brain's image of someone else. So what we're going to ask you to do as you write is to let yourself breathe. Let yourself keep your breath moving. Keep observing your breath and keep your breath moving as you write about your 3 earliest memories of conflict. Once you've finished with the 3 early memories, then what we're going to ask you to do is to fill in a set of blanks for each of those memories. And a set of blanks, if you take a look, looks like life is, I am, I feel. People are, relationships are, I must, I need, I want to punish whoever's involved by or myself by. And so that would be one set of blanks for memory 1. Another set of blanks for memory 2. Another set of blanks for memory 3. Now, what might the answers look like? Well, let's imagine we've got a young man who has been just knocked off his bicycle by his brother. And his brother has beat him up. He's laying there with a bloody nose. And I walk up with a tape recorder. Gee, Sonny, how do you feel about life? Oh, life hurts. Life sucks. And how about yourself? I'm weak and helpless. And relationships, they're the pits. And on goes his list. So that would be one set of blanks. We're going to ask you to fill in one set of blanks for each of the 3 memories. And we're going to take an intermission. So we had a couple of questions in our intermission about this worksheet. And first of all, the place where you put in that memory of conflict can be, again, a situation where you were directly involved or you were just observing someone in conflict. It doesn't matter. Whatever your mind defines as conflict. And then we had some questions about the punishment part. Well, who would want to punish themselves? Anyone in hostility or fear can turn the punishment that they hold toward themselves. And the reason for that is because the mind is using corrupt data, and when we're in hostility and fear, we're insane. We're functioning out of a mind. And the definition I use for insanity in this work is a mind without love. It's a mind that's insane. Why would we take someone who we say, you are so dear to my heart, I love you, I cherish you, and why would we do some of the things that we've done to them? In fact, we live in a culture that has songs whose title or whose melody line goes, you only hurt the one you love. Who would do that? Why would anybody do that? One who would do that would be someone who does not have love for their partner, but rather has matching bags of garbage for their partner. And when they lose the presence of being, the mind will do anything that it's been structured to do. In fact, we have generations of that kind of stuff going on inside of us. You know, how many remember the story about Moses in the desert wandering for 40 years? Do you remember what had to happen before they could get out of the desert and go into the promised land? Now, I'd offer that word desert as a code word, again, for the unconscious. It was about we human beings who wander around wondering what end is up and why is this happening to me again. When they said the old generation had to die off, that did not mean that everybody in old physical bodies had to physically die. The root of the word generation is genari, which means cause. All of the old causes held in the mind had to be removed. And literally, when you recognize that this body-mind unit is an energy system, it is a device that stores every frequency that comes to it. Every thought, every feeling, every reality is stored holographically in every cell, including the sperm and the egg. And were you to conceive a child tomorrow, that child would have in its structure every thought you've ever thought, every feeling you've ever felt, every reality you have ever engaged in. It's all stored there. And when a child is conceived, that child is conceived and has in the single cell at conception every thought, every feeling, every reality of the previous generation. In fact, in the Aramaic, where they understood how this worked, they said the sins of the father, and of course it's not just the sins, the wonderful things are there too, of the previous generations, are stored holographically within the structure. And what they said in the Aramaic was 4 generations. The old generation had to die off. That is, the impact of those old energies had to be removed from your body-mind unit. Elsewise, what your body-mind unit would tend to do would be to unfold the dynamics of the generations. There's a wonderful system of family therapy. And in family therapy, one of what I consider to be one of the most powerful assignments that's often given is you interview everybody that's ever known anything about anybody in your family. If there's a woman in the village that your great-grandfather was raised and she was 6 years old when he was 102, and she's now 96, you go talk to her and find out what she knew. And what happens as people write the history of these generations is, all of a sudden they see an assembly of all of what they thought were the choices they had made in their lives. And they had made no original choices. This genetic structure that we have is a vibratory database that carries information from the generations. So when they said the sins of the father would be passed into 3 and 4 generations, that wasn't about punishing you for what your fathers and their fathers and all the way back to Adam did. It was just telling you how this energy system works, that you've got that data in there. And of course, when you go back to the 4th generation back, where did they get their thoughts, feelings, and realities? But from the previous 4. Who got them from the previous 4? You have your whole bloodline in your structure and the patterns that go along with it. If you have any doubt about that, go out and check out a couple of the books that have been written about identical twins who are separated at birth and don't even know that the other one exists. And look at how many so-called choices they made that were identical to the twin that they lost contact with at birth. Here they are 50 years later, and there's so many things in their lives that are identical because we are energetic frequency beings. And we tend, unless we're awake to our being, which is what our relationships give us the opportunity to do, we tend to simply play out the thoughts of the generations. Jeannie went to the computer when we talked about this, and she did some spreadsheets on how many lives there are in a number of generations. Now, when you take 4 generations, what you have is 31 lives. When you take yourself, mom and dad's mom, go back 4 generations, that's 31 lives. Now, just for interest's sake, when you start recognizing those patterned ways of thinking, are there 10 generations, there are 2,047 people in your bloodline in 10 generations. That means, and just think about your life experiences and your thoughts and your feelings about what's happened around conflicts and situations and the world situations and family situations. Think about what's happening 2 generations ago, 4 generations ago. Go back 10 generations and recognize that the thoughts and the feelings and the patterns of those 10 generations are passed to you at conception. It's 2,047 lives. If you go to 20 generations, we're now talking in your bloodline about 2,097,152 people. 20 generations. If we go back 50 generations, and we're talking about how these patterns develop, we're looking at 2,252 with 12 zeros after it. That's how many people are in your bloodline. If you go back 120 generations, you've got 2,658 with 33 zeros behind it. These are patterned ways of thinking and feeling that came in with your physiological energy system. And just for interest's sake, because the number's kind of fun, the spreadsheet would only go up to, where you could read the zeros, would only go up to 800 generations. You know how many there are? There are 1,333 people, and then there are 243 zeros behind that in 800 generations of your bloodline. Now, when you start to look for patterns and you start to clean the patterns up, everything changes. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is to look at your worksheet with your 3 early memories. And under the blank life is, the first blank, I'm going to ask you to look at memory 1, memory 2, and memory 3. Does anybody notice anything? They're similar? How many notice that they're similar or the same? I see a number of heads shaking unenthusiastically, yes. If you look at I am under memory 1, memory 2, memory 3, do you see a pattern? Are there any similarities? I feel, people are, relationships are. Look at the patterns in those 3 early memories. And now, if you would, imagine yourself or recall yourself in a conflict with someone that you had, let's say, within the last week. If you were to look at a conflict situation at some time in the last week and quickly fill out a set of blanks, would there be a similarity in the pattern when you look at that conflict in the last week and what happened in your early memories? Most people going yes? Yes, yes, okay. Now, if you look at the pattern in the early memories and you look at that conflict today, how many thought when you dealt with that conflict today in the last week that you were actually dealing with the conflict of an adult? And guess what? Most of us are continuously dealing with content that we made up as children, and we're still projecting it into our brain's image of others and thinking it's about others. If you went back and looked at, let's do another step there. If you look, let's let go of the responsibility aspect that we're talking about with this work for a moment, and let's go with the world's way of looking at things. It's all their fault. If you look at who did it to you in your early memories and you look at who did it to you today, is it the same person? No? Most people, it was somebody different. All right. Now, imagine yourself going back, let's say, 5 or 6 years ago. It's around 2000, 7 years ago. And you look at a conflict you had around the year 2000. If you sketched in a set of blanks, would the pattern be similar to your conflicts today and your early memories? Most heads disappointingly shaking yes. Okay. If you look at who did it to you in your early memories and you look at who did it to you today and you look at who did it to you in 2000, is it the same person? No? For most people, it's somebody different. All right? Now, let's go back 10 years ago. And 10 years ago, looking at those conflicts, let's look at a conflict situation that went on 10 years ago. And if you look at what happened in that conflict situation. So imagine we're going back to about 1995. You want to look at a situation that was a conflict at that point. If you look at the pattern, is the pattern similar to your early memories, your present conflict, and the one you had around 2000? Pattern similar? Is the pattern similar? I can't hear you. Yes. Yeah, okay, we got most of the yeses. All right. Now, if you look at who did it to you in your early memories, you look at who did it to you today, you look at who did it to you 5, 6, 7 years ago, and then you look at who did it to you 10 years ago, is it the same person? No? Somebody different. Okay. Let's go back 20 years ago. Think about a conflict that was happening in your life about 20 years ago. If you fill in a set of blanks, is the pattern similar?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And if you look at who did it to you 20 years ago, is it the same person that did it in your early memories, did it to you today, did it to you 5 years ago, did it to you 10 years ago? Is it the same person? No. No, somebody different. Okay. So, now what I'm going to ask you to do is to raise your hand, kind of just your right hand over your shoulder a little bit. And if you would, pat yourself on the back for how much power you have. Because that's a lot of power to pull that many people in over that long a period of time out of your content and to get them to keep doing those things to you. That's a lot of power. Now, I would offer that life is construction and delivery. And according to the content that you hold in your mind, life responds. You might remember this fellow 2,000 years ago that said, here's how life works, folks. If you ask, you receive. And that means if you've received it, it's because you've asked for it. Now, of course, most people go, well, wait a minute, this isn't what I've been asking for. You haven't been reading my mail. Oh, wait a minute. That's not what you've been asking for in your head. But remember in the ancient teachings where they understood how it really worked? They didn't say, as a man thinketh in his head, so will be his life. What did they say? As a man thinketh in his heart. As you think in your unconscious, when you say, this isn't what I've been asking for, this isn't what I want, your wanter is not in your head. Your wanter's in your heart, and it works according to the accumulations of content, the accumulations of data from all the generations. And they literally set up a field, a measurable high-energy wave that sends out a signal that draws or resonates to you exactly the person who can deliver to you what it is that you're asking for. And you ask by the generational accumulations of energy. And you have a lot of power. Now, as long as you believe that when this person delivers to you a behavior, that the content of your mind, your hostility and fear, is caused by them, you cannot reach into your heart and remove from your heart the wrongs of your brother. Those things that you put into your brain's image of someone else, you think belongs to them, and of course you can't change them. Yeshua is really clear. You've got to look into your own heart. You've got to look into your content that you put into your brain's image of another, and you've got to acquire the skill of removing from your unconscious that which never belonged in a human being in the first place. If you don't ever do that, then you will tend to put an end to relationship after relationship after relationship. It is so important that if you really want to have conscious, fulfilling, wonderful relationships, that you own and clean up what's going on in your mind through the process of your relationships.